The air outside Langston Aerodyne's headquarters smelled like ozone and glass. It was late spring in Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of warm afternoon where wealth glistened in the sun, literally. Rows of luxury cars curved around the company's private rooftop terrace like a glossy magazine spread. A Tesla Plaid, a Lucid Air, 2 Bentleys, a vintage Jaguar, and something that looked custom-built to fly more than drive. The quarterly showcase had become a tradition. Executives strutted out their latest statements, each vehicle a symbol of status, bonus checks, and silent rivalries. Miranda Langston stepped out of her Gulfstream-colored Genesis convertible and let the valet handle the rest. She didn't need to announce herself. Conversations shifted, laughs quieted. People made space around her the way rivers move around rocks. She wore white, sharp, clean, almost blinding in the sun. Not a drop of sweat despite the heat. Her hair pinned up perfectly, not a strand out of place. Across the rooftop, the head of R&D was showing off a matte black Porsche Taycan. The marketing team had brought in a drone for overhead footage. Someone was live streaming the whole thing on LinkedIn. And then Miranda saw it. In the corner of the lot, parked so far from the others it was practically in exile, sat a car that didn't belong. Rust streaked the hood. One headlight was fogged over. The paint, once maybe candy apple red, had faded into a dull, defeated brown. A battered 1977 Mustang coupe slumped like an old dog too tired to get up. Miranda's gaze lingered on it. Her perfectly shaped brow lifted a half-inch. "Whose is that?" she asked, loud enough for her assistant to hear, but soft enough to sound amused, not annoyed. Laughter rippled nearby. "Must be maintenance. Can't imagine anyone else driving that up here?" someone muttered. Miranda tilted her head, studying the car like it was a broken sculpture someone had left on her patio. Then she smiled. "Let's invite him over." Her assistant blinked. "Ma'am." She turned her smile, now stage ready. "Let's not be exclusive today. Innovation doesn't have a dress code, right? Have someone bring the owner up." A few phones came out, eager for the moment to go viral. Downstairs, Jake Redding was wiping down a vending machine in the east lobby. His coveralls were faded blue, a patch with the Langston logo stitched above his heart. His mop leaned against the wall. His name tag was peeling at the corner. When the intern came to fetch him, barely 19, nervous, Jake didn't ask questions. He just followed, wiping his hands on a rag he kept in his back pocket. He stepped out onto the rooftop terrace and into the middle of a scene that didn't have room for him. Miranda's voice floated across the space like sugar in iced tea. "There he is, our guest of honor." Dozens of faces turned to look, some smiling, some curious, a few recording, all of them expecting something, probably something embarrassing. Jake blinked against the light, but he didn't squint. He didn't flinch. He walked toward her calmly, like he was clocking into another shift. Miranda gestured toward the Mustang. "That's yours, isn't it?" she asked, sipping from a glass of cucumber water. "Quite the vintage piece." Jake glanced at the car, then at her. "Yes, ma'am, it's mine." A beat passed. Then came the laugh, soft, practiced, designed to land well on camera. "I was just saying how bold it was to bring something so nostalgic to an innovation showcase." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "Does it run?" Jake was quiet for a second too long. "It runs," he said. The crowd stirred. Someone near the back whispered, "No way." "Really?" Miranda tilted her head. "Because I have a hard time believing that thing still starts." Jake looked at her. Not with anger, not even embarrassment. Just patience, like he was waiting for her to be done performing. "You want to see?" he asked. Miranda hesitated. "Yes," she said, suddenly aware that she wasn't in control anymore. Jake nodded once, walked past her, past the crowd, past the Teslas and Benzes and gleaming prototypes. He reached the car, rested his hand on the door. The metal was hot from the sun. Familiar. Solid. He opened it. The hinge groaned audibly. Someone chuckled. He sat down behind the wheel. The interior was as beat up as the outside. Old leather, cracked dash. A photograph faded at the edges tucked into the visor. Jake stared at it for a long breath. Then he turned the key. The engine didn't cough. It didn't growl. It didn't whine. It sang. The sound that poured out of that Mustang was nothing like anyone expected. Not the low rumble of an aging muscle car. Not the roar of gas combustion. It was smooth, deep, resonant. It filled the rooftop with something that wasn't noise, it was presence, like hearing a symphony tuning itself into perfect harmony. Every conversation died. Every phone froze. Even Miranda lowered her glass. The Mustang idled with perfect balance. No vibration, no smoke, just sound. Jake revved the engine once, then twice. Each time it responded like it was alive. People stared not at him, but at the car, like it had transformed itself while they weren't looking. He turned off the ignition. Silence fell again. Then Jake stepped out and walked past them all without a word. No smirk, no triumph, just quiet. Miranda stood frozen, her voice gone. Jake passed her on his way to the elevator. "That's what it sounds like," he said gently, "when you build something with heart." And then he was gone. Back down the elevator, back to the lobby, back to the life they'd all ignored. But not one person on that rooftop looked at the Mustang the same way again. Not after that sound. Not after him. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The rooftop never really recovered. Even after Jake left, even after the music came back on, and the cucumber water was refilled and the drone buzzed around like nothing had happened, something had shifted. You could feel it in the silence between conversations, in the glances cast toward the corner where the Mustang still sat. No one made jokes anymore. Miranda stood beside the railing, her face turned toward the skyline, but her eyes weren't watching the city. They were stuck on a sound. That engine hadn't just run, it had spoken, and whatever it said to her. "I've never heard anything like that," Samira said quietly, stepping up beside her. She wasn't smiling. Her arms were folded across her chest, and there was something sharp in her voice that hadn't been there before. "It's probably just a modded electric swap," Miranda replied, brushing a non-existent hair from her cheek. "Old body, new guts, a stunt." Samira gave her a look. That wasn't electric. Miranda didn't answer. She couldn't not without showing something. Samira shifted her weight. "Do you know who he is?" Miranda glanced over. "He's a janitor, and that's all." Her silence stretched too long. Samira exhaled, disappointed. "If you don't find out, someone else will." She walked away. Miranda stayed there a moment longer, hand resting on the railing, fingers tightening. Not because she was angry, because she'd felt something, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Jake stood in front of the vending machine again. Same floor, same hall. His hands moved automatically, restocking, cleaning, organizing. It was quiet up here. Quiet suited him. He liked buildings before they woke up. Before voices filled the walls, before shoes clicked on tile, before people remembered he was there and tried not to look at him while they passed. He liked the moments before. And yet today, something sat heavy on his chest. The air still carried that rooftop tension. He felt it in the way people paused when they saw him. Not out of judgment anymore, but curiosity, as if they were seeing him for the first time and didn't know what to do with it. He didn't blame them. Even he wasn't sure what to do with it. The Mustang had been his one secret, the only piece of his life untouched by compromise. And now, they'd all heard it. Mr. Redding, he turned. A soft voice, kind but formal. It was Eloise. She stood in the hallway with a paper cup of tea, the string still hanging down the side. Retired last fall, but still visited once a week to drop off homemade lemon cookies and chat with reception. She was one of the few who'd ever called him by name. "Afternoon," Jake said, offering a tired smile. I watched the video. She held up her phone like it was an admission. Twice. Jake scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah, that's been making the rounds, hasn't it?" She stepped closer, eyes softening. It was beautiful, Jake. He looked down suddenly, unsure what to do with the compliment. She tilted her head. "Is it true, that engine?" Jake didn't speak. He didn't have to. Eloise nodded slowly, her eyes misting. "You built that with her, didn't you?" His throat tightened. There it was her, the thing no one else knew, but somehow Eloise did. Jake gave a slow nod. "Every part," he said. Piece by piece. Eloise smiled gently, and for a moment her voice dropped into something deeper, almost reverent. She would have loved that sound. Jake looked at her, startled. Eloise sipped her tea, unbothered. "I remember Sarah. Just barely. But I do. She'd come by sometimes waiting to drive you home, always had oil on her jeans and a book under her arm." Jake laughed quietly, caught off guard by the memory. "She used to say a clean car was a sign of a boring life, I remember," Eloise said. "And that Mustang never cleaned a day in its life." They stood there in silence, the years between them heavy and warm. Then Eloise touched his arm. "Don't let them take it," she whispered. "Whatever they offer. Don't let them take what she built with you." Jake nodded, but didn't trust himself to speak. Eloise left. Jake watched her go. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a warning. Miranda stood in her office later that night alone, except for the low hum of the floor lights. The skyline outside was soft with haze. She stared at the paused footage on her laptop screen. Jake under the hood, hands moving with precision, expression unreadable. But the sound. That engine. It didn't belong in any category, she understood. Not combustion, not electric, not hybrid. It didn't just run, it resonated. Miranda had grown up with machines. Her father used to take her to car shows instead of birthday parties. She'd built her first fuel cell at 13. She could ID most engines by sound before she could drive. But this didn't sound like anything she'd ever heard. She hit play again, watched the clip through, stopped it on a frame where Jake wiped sweat from his brow. Zoomed in. Paused. He looked alone. Not in the way poor people looked alone, not bitter, not desperate, but like someone who had chosen silence. She sat back, thoughtful. Then, after a moment, she opened a new email. Subject line: background check, Jake Redding. She hesitated only for a second before typing, "find everything." She didn't know what she was chasing yet, but she knew one thing for sure. That car wasn't junk, and that man wasn't just a janitor. Not anymore. The search results came back faster than expected. Miranda sat at her desk in the executive suite, scrolling through a PDF her assistant had sent under the subject line, "Requested background Jake Redding." She had expected something curious. She hadn't expected this. Jake Allen Redding. Age 42, born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. MIT graduate, double major in mechanical and aerospace engineering. Internship at NASA. Postgrad fellowship with a propulsion lab in Huntsville. 6 co-authored research papers. 3 patent filings under his name, and 1 under Sarah Redding. Miranda's hand hovered over her mouse as she clicked that link. Sarah Harper Redding, mechanical engineer, freelance researcher, married to Jake in 2008, deceased 2015, car accident. Miranda leaned back, the edges of the screen suddenly blurred. He hadn't just been someone once, he'd been someone important, respected, brilliant, and then gone. Why would someone like him be scrubbing floors? She murmured aloud. She stared out at the city beyond the glass wall of her office. The cars below moved like clockwork toys, mindless and predictable. Her voice softened. What happened to you, Jake? Across town, in a one-story brick garage with a dented blue roll-up door, Jake stood in front of the Mustang with the hood open. Benji sat nearby on a crate, a textbook on his lap, sneakers kicking gently at the cracked concrete. Jake was wiping a spark plug with a cloth, slow and focused. You really think it was too much? Benji asked. Jake didn't look up. Too much what's starting it, in front of all those people. Her. Jake paused, then sighed. I didn't plan on starting it, he said. I didn't plan on being part of any of that. Benji frowned. She made fun of it, Dad. Jake nodded. She did. And you showed her. He met his son's eyes. That's not the point. Benji squinted. Then what as Jake set the spark plug down and rested his hands on the edge of the open hood? The light overhead buzzed a slow flicker of fluorescence, washing everything in a cold yellow glow. There's a difference between making a point and making a memory, Jake said. I didn't build this to prove anything to them. I built it to keep something alive. Benji's voice dropped. Mom? Jake nodded. She didn't want this to just sit in a notebook or gather dust on a shelf. She believed in it, not just the tech, the idea of it. Benji looked down at the textbook again. Then quietly. Sometimes I forget what she sounded like. Jake blinked. That landed deeper than he was ready for. He crossed the small garage, sat beside his son on the crate, and said nothing for a moment. Just let the hum of the light and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog fill the silence. Then she had this laugh, Jake said softly, high and sharp, like it surprised even her. She always covered her mouth when she laughed hard, like she was trying to hold it in but couldn't. Benji smiled, eyes wet. She loved the smell of motor oil, hated electric scooters, said they felt like cheating. Benji chuckled. Jake wiped a hand down his face. I miss her every day, Benj, but I hear her in this engine. They both turned to look at the Mustang. It's not just a machine, Jake said. It's the last part of her I get to talk to. That night, Miranda scrolled through old digital archives, trying to find more about Sarah Redding. The trail was thin. A few published pieces in obscure engineering blogs. A podcast episode where she spoke briefly about sustainable propulsion. Miranda listened to it 3 times. Sarah's voice was soft but certain. She said things like, "We're not just building for speed, we're building for survival." She didn't sound like a dreamer. She sounded like a builder, like someone who meant every word. And then suddenly Miranda remembered something. A pitch meeting 10, maybe 12 years ago. A couple, mid-30s, faded folders, hopeful eyes. They wanted to present a prototype. Her father had waved them off, said it was too homemade, too risky. Could that have been Jake and Sarah? She checked the archived schedule. 1 appointment. Redding unverified prototype. Cancelled. She felt her stomach tighten. Cancelled by her father. She leaned back in her chair, heart pulling tight in her chest. Her entire company had been built on propulsion advancements, half of them inspired by research that looked eerily close to what she was seeing in those old Redding patents. Was it possible? No. That was a conspiracy theory. Right. But the timing. And now Jake was here, working for her, hiding in plain sight. And that engine, the sound of it, had come from something more than tech. It had come from love, from grief, from brilliance denied. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't want this to be real. She didn't want to carry the weight of it. And yet something deep inside whispered, "You already are." The next morning, Jake clocked in as usual. Same dusty badge, same creaky time clock. But everything felt different. He could feel the glances now. Eyes that darted toward him, then away. Conversations that stopped when he entered a hallway. A silence that stretched just a little too long when he passed. He didn't like it. He wasn't trying to be noticed. At the elevator, as the doors slid open, he nearly walked into Samira. "Morning," she said, stepping back to let him in. He nodded about to continue down the hall, but she pressed the hold button. "You've got a minute?" Jake paused. "Sure." They stood in the elevator as it hummed to life. She didn't speak right away, just looked at him with a kind of quiet assessment. "I looked you up," she finally said. Jake stayed still. "I know who you are, or I guess were." He met her eyes, calm. "Still am." She smiled, small and respectful. "Why are you here, Jake?" "Really?" He thought about that for a long moment. Then, "Because some things are worth finishing, even if no one's watching." Samira nodded slowly. "Well, someone's watching now." He looked down at the elevator floor. "Yeah, I noticed." As the doors opened, she stepped out first, then turned back to him. "If you ever want to talk about it," she said, "I'm not the kind of engineer who only understands numbers." Jake raised a brow. "What kind are you?" Her smile flickered. "The kind who's starting to wonder if the best ideas don't come from labs." The doors closed between them. Jake stood alone. And somewhere behind the quiet hum of the elevator's descent, he could hear the Mustang. Waiting. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The invitation arrived in the form of an official HR memo. Subject line, private meeting request, Langston Executive Office. Jake read it twice before setting his coffee down. The wording was formal, polite, but the undertone was impossible to miss. This wasn't a conversation. It was a summons. Benji was still eating cereal in the corner of the garage, backpack, half-zipped shoes untied. Jake watched him for a moment, then glanced at the Mustang. The hood was up again. He had pulled the intake unit off last night and noticed a hairline fracture in one of the support brackets. A week ago, that would have mattered more. Now everything felt like it was speeding toward something, and he didn't have a clue what. "You good if I pick you up a little late today?" Jake asked. Benji nodded, mouthful of Cheerios. "Yeah, choir practice after school." Jake tossed him the extra house key. "Lock up behind you, and no touching the inverter unit." Benji grinned. "What if I look at it really hard?" Jake narrowed his eyes. "I mean it, Benji. I won't touch it." "Chill." Jake smiled, despite himself, ruffled his son's curls, and grabbed his jacket. It was time. Hardworking. Langston's executive wing didn't look like part of the same building. Frosted glass walls, silent hallways, and the soft scent of lavender diffused through the vents like it was trying to cover something up. Jake stepped off the elevator and walked past rows of closed doors, all polished wood and chrome handles, until he reached the last one. Her name was on the plaque, Miranda Langston, Chief Executive Officer. He raised a hand to knock, but didn't have to. The door opened before he touched it. Miranda stood on the other side in a navy blue blouse and tailored slacks, hair pulled into a smooth twist, no jewelry. She looked unguarded. Not casual, but different. Lighter somehow. The edge she usually wore like armor was missing. "Jake," she said, Thank you for coming. He nodded but said nothing. Come in, she added. Please. The office was as sleek as he remembered. Wide glass desk, minimalist art. A model of the first Langston flight prototype under a spotlight in the corner. She gestured to a chair across from her. Jake sat slowly back, straight eyes calm. She waited a moment, then walked to her side of the desk and lowered herself into the chair. I wanted to talk to you personally, she began. Not through HR, not through some formal policy document. Jake tilted his head. You always talk to your janitorial staff one-on-one. Her lips pressed together just enough to show he'd struck something. But she nodded. This isn't about that. It's about you. And the car. Jake's fingers steepled. Thought that might be the case. Miranda looked down at her hands for a moment, then back at him. I did some research, she said. Your name came up in a few old papers, some aerospace publications, early propulsion experiments at NASA. You were part of a team working on energy stabilization models, ones that never made it past concept stage, until I heard that engine of yours. Jake didn't move. I want to make you an offer, she said. There it was. I'll buy the car. Outright. As is. Jake inhaled once slow. How much, he asked, voice unreadable. She paused. 500,000. The silence that followed was thick enough to press against the walls. Jake leaned back, hands folded over his lap. You think it's worth 500 grand? I think it could be worth a lot more, she admitted. But I also think you're someone who doesn't want the headache of lawyers, patents, and media attention. That kind of value comes with noise. I can shield you from that. Jake shook his head just once. You're not buying a car. You're trying to buy her. Miranda's brow furrowed. I don't know what you mean. Jake leaned forward, elbows on knees, now voice low. That engine wasn't mine alone. It was my wife's. Every line of code, every gear ratio, every recalibration, we built it together. In our garage. Before she got sick. Before the crash. You're not offering $500,000 for the car, Miranda. You're offering $500,000 to bury the story. She looked at him. Then, not with power, not with charm, but with something closer to frustration. Or maybe shame. I didn't come here to take anything from you. Jake stood. No, he said. You came to buy the last thing I have left of her. Miranda stood too. Jake, I'm not angry, he interrupted, voice calm but solid. I get it. You see something powerful and you want to control it. That's what people like you do. She blinked. People like me. Jake nodded. People who've never built anything with their hands, only their leverage. She stepped around the desk slowly, her voice dropping. You don't know what I've built, don't I? They stood 3 feet apart. And for a moment something shifted in the air. Not anger, not business. Just two people staring across a quiet space, realizing they both carried grief in different shapes. You're not the villain here, Miranda Jake said softly. But you're standing at the edge of a line, and once you cross it, there's no going back. She didn't answer. He walked to the door, hand on the knob. Before he left, she spoke again, quieter this time. What if I told you my father denied your patent meeting? Jake froze. He turned slowly. What Miranda swallowed. 12 years ago. You and your wife had an appointment at Langston. It was canceled. My father said it was too raw, too undeveloped. I found the old schedule in our archive. Your name was on it. He never even let you in the building. Jake stared at her, the weight of it hitting like cold rain. His shoulders dropped just slightly. We didn't know, he whispered. We thought no one cared. Miranda stepped forward, voice tight. Maybe I'm not trying to buy the engine. Maybe I'm trying to make something right. Jake held her gaze. Then quietly, making things right doesn't start with a check. He opened the door, paused. And it doesn't start in here. Then he was gone. Miranda stood alone in her office, one hand resting on the edge of the desk. She didn't sit back down. Instead, she turned to the window, watching the sun climb over the skyline, feeling for the first time in years like everything she thought she controlled was moving far beyond her reach. Miranda didn't go back to her desk. She couldn't. The moment Jake left her office, a strange quiet settled in a kind that didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something had shifted underneath her feet, and now the floor didn't quite hold the same. She stood by the window, arms folded, her reflection staring back at her in the glass. She looked calm, composed. But inside, everything she'd built her name on was pressing against her ribs. Jake Redding. The janitor. The man her company had passed over more than a decade ago. She kept thinking about what he said. "You're trying to buy the last thing I have left of her." And the way he looked when she told him about her father, like the weight of a dozen silent years suddenly found words. Miranda closed her eyes. Then she reached for her phone. The old warehouse off Freedom Drive hadn't changed much since the 90s. A rusted sign over the side door still read, "Anders and Pierce Fabrication." The letters were half faded, but the place was still standing, still humming with the echo of old machines and ideas that never saw daylight. Miranda pulled into the cracked parking lot in a rented sedan. No driver, no assistant, just her. Inside, the air was thick with oil and old wood and the faint trace of solder. A man in a flannel shirt and tan work pants looked up from the bench, squinting. He hadn't seen her in years. "Miranda." His voice was low, surprised. "I thought you were allergic to real tools." She smiled faintly. "Nice to see you too, Richard." He chuckled, standing to wipe his hands. His knuckles were thick and scarred from years of welding, but his handshake was steady. "What brings you to the relic yard? I need to ask you about something," she said. "Langston business." She hesitated. "Family business." He raised an eyebrow. They sat across from each other at a metal work table, littered with bolts, circuit boards, and a half-dismantled alternator. A tiny fan turned slowly in the corner, failing to move the heavy air. "I found a name," Miranda said in the old appointment logs. "Jake and Sarah Redding." Richard's smile faded. "I remember them. They came here." He nodded slowly. "Once, maybe twice. Sarah mostly. She had the brains. Jake had the heart. She'd pitch like a pro and he'd sit back listening more than talking. But when he did speak, you listened. Every time." Miranda leaned forward. "What were they building?" Richard scratched his jaw. "Something they called the Aurora engine. Said it was clean, scalable, could generate sustained torque with minimal draw. Claimed it could rewire everything, transport, aerospace, even emergency power. I thought it was ambitious. But when Sarah ran that first demo, Miranda. I still remember the way it sounded. Not like a machine, like music." Miranda's throat caught. "And you? What sent them to my father?" Richard gave a small, guilty shrug. "Told them Langston had deeper pockets than we did. Bigger reach. I figured your dad would at least give them a meeting." "He didn't." Richard nodded, gaze heavy now. "Then I guess that's on me too." Miranda looked down at the table at a tiny copper coil resting near her hand. "He said I'm trying to buy her memory?" she whispered. "Isn't that what Langston's been doing for years?" Richard said gently. "Buying stories and burying them," Miranda didn't answer. Richard leaned back. "You want to do right by them, you're gonna have to change the way you play the game?" She looked up. "What if I don't know how?" He smiled, but it was sad. "Then maybe it's time you learn." The next morning, Jake was back in the garage grease on his forearms, his hands deep in the Mustang's undercarriage. The silence was good. It kept him focused. It kept his thoughts from drifting back to Miranda's office. But even silence had cracks. Benji appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey," he said. "Someone's here." Jake slid out from under the car. "What do you mean here?" Benji stepped aside. Miranda stood just outside her heels, quiet on the gravel, her blouse wrinkled slightly, like she'd been sitting in the car too long thinking. Jake didn't move. Miranda took a step forward. "I'm not here to make another offer," she said. "Good," Jake replied. "Because I'd say no." She gave a small nod, accepting that. "I talked to Richard Pierce yesterday, the one who sent you and Sarah to Langston." Jake's jaw tensed. "He remembers us." "He does." "So do I." That gave him pause. "You were just a kid. I was in the hallway when you walked in. I remember Sarah's notebook. It had stars drawn on the cover." Jake's expression softened just slightly. "She drew those during a storm once," he said. "To calm herself down." "I didn't know," Miranda said. "I didn't know what you were offering. What my father turned away. I don't know how many other people we passed over. But I know I can't ignore this anymore." She stepped closer, more cautious now. "I don't want to buy the engine, Jake. I want to understand it. I want to learn why it matters not just to you, but to what it can do for the world. And I want to understand her." Jake watched her, searching for the part where this might be a lie. But it wasn't there. All he saw was someone who looked a little bit lost, and maybe for the first time wasn't pretending not to be. "I don't share this with people," he said quietly. "Not because I'm selfish, but because once you let someone near it, they start wanting to control it, rename it, rebuild it into something it's not." "I won't," she said. "I just want to hear it again. With the right ears this time." He studied her, then slowly nodded. Benji looked from one to the other, confused but curious. Jake gestured toward the Mustang. "You want to hear her sing?" Miranda smiled. "Yes." Jake turned the key, and once again the Aurora engine came to life, not with a roar, not with a scream, but with a hum that filled the garage like a breath long held and finally exhaled. Miranda stood there, eyes wide, and for the first time since they met, she didn't say a word. The sound of the engine lingered long after Jake turned the key off. Not in the air, but in the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, charged, like something sacred had just happened, and everyone knew better than to speak too quickly. Miranda stood a few steps back from the Mustang arms, lightly crossed eyes fixed on the dashboard like it still held the answers she hadn't known she was looking for. Jake didn't rush to break the moment. He waited. He knew that look. He'd seen it on Sarah's face once, the first time the engine fired clean, the first time it sounded not like an experiment but a heartbeat. "Is it always like that?" Miranda finally asked, her voice quieter than before. Jake nodded. "Every time." She exhaled slowly, then looked over at him. "I don't know how I missed this. How everyone missed it." "You didn't miss it," Jake said. "You just never looked in the places where things are built in silence." Miranda didn't smile. But there was something warmer in her eyes now. Benji wandered back in from the house, holding a water bottle, earbuds still hanging around his neck. "Is it weird that I'm kinda getting used to seeing you here?" he asked Miranda, half teasing. She let out a breath of a laugh. "I'll try not to overstay my welcome." Jake looked between them. Something about this scene, his son, the Mustang Miranda in his garage, felt so surreal, it almost didn't fit. And yet, it did. Miranda turned back to the car. "What would happen if this engine went public?" Jake's expression shifted. Guarded again. "A lot of attention," he said. "A lot of scrutiny. Probably a dozen companies lining up to buy patents. Try to reverse engineer it, water it down." "But what if we didn't sell it?" she asked. What if we used it right? Jake tilted his head. Define right. Miranda stepped closer, hands at her sides now. What if we didn't give it to the market, but gave it to the future infrastructure? Emergency systems, humanitarian transport, off-grid communities. Think about it. A powertrain that doesn't rely on combustion or unstable grid systems. This could change everything. Jake looked down, his jaw tight. That was always the dream, he said. It's why we called it Aurora, first light. But dreams get heavy when you're carrying them alone. Miranda's voice softened. You're not alone anymore. Jake looked up, eyes meeting hers. He didn't answer. The next day, Langston's executive conference room filled with tension before anyone even spoke. Miranda stood at the head of the table, a large display behind her showing a freeze frame of Jake's engine on screen. No branding, no labels, just clean lines and raw design. Around the table sat 8 of the most powerful department heads in the company: finance, legal, engineering, media, and a few old board members who never said much but always listened like hawks. Before we start, Miranda began. I want to make something clear. The room quieted instantly. This isn't a pitch. It's not a product. It's a proposal to reimagine how we invest in innovation, not by taking it, but by building around it. Someone at the far end, Miles Denning, VP of Strategy, leaned back, skeptical. Are we talking about this janitor again? Miranda's voice didn't waver. We're talking about an MIT-trained engineer who designed something our labs couldn't duplicate in 10 years. Miles raised a brow. And you trust this engine? There's no precedent, no peer review, no manufacturing model it runs, she cut in. Perfectly. I heard it. You can too if you're willing to visit a garage instead of a boardroom. Whispers rolled across the table. Another exec, Elena Shaw, head of legal, folded her hands. Even if it's real, Miranda, the patent's expired. It was never formalized. That means anyone could claim it. You want Langston to back something that's legally floating? Miranda took a breath. I'm not backing an engine. I'm backing a man who gave up everything trying to build something better. A pause. Then, he didn't come to us. I went to him. That landed. You could feel the balance shift just slightly. Give me 90 days, she said. To develop a case for partnership. Not ownership. I want to do this differently. This company was founded on risk. I'm asking for one more. There were no immediate approvals, just silence. Then murmurs, then a slow nod from one of the senior members. Miranda stepped back from the table. The tide hadn't turned fully, but it was moving. That evening, Jake stood outside the garage, arms crossed, watching the sunset paint the driveway in soft orange. He heard her before he saw her. Miranda pulled up in the same rented sedan, stepping out with something in her hand, an old folder, its corners worn and soft from time. Jake raised an eyebrow. More offers. She walked over, holding it out. He took it slowly, opened it. Inside were 3 things. 1, a printed image of their original patent submission, one he hadn't seen in over a decade. 2, a note in her handwriting: I can't change what we missed, but I can help make sure no one misses what's next. 3, a photo. A still frame from the rooftop showcase. The Mustang. Jake, the moment the engine first sang. He stared at it for a long time. Then looked up. You're serious about this? She nodded. I don't want to take anything from you, Jake. I want to build something with you. He studied her face. There was no performance there. No calculation. Just someone trying to get it right. He set the folder down and leaned against the hood of the car. I'm not easy to work with, he said. I like things slow, precise. I'm not here to impress shareholders. I don't need you to be, Miranda said. I need you to keep being you." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then let's build it." And for the first time since Sarah was gone, Jake felt something rise in his chest that had been quiet for too long. Hope. Jake stepped into Langston's innovation lab for the first time, not as an employee, but as a partner. The difference wasn't in his badge. It was in the way the receptionist stood up a little straighter when she saw him, the way the elevator doors held open a second longer than usual, the way people looked at him still curious but no longer dismissive. The lab itself was tucked behind tinted glass on the 6th floor, a sprawling space filled with light, soft whirring machines and rows of engineers in navy jackets and denim collars. Screens glowed, parts hummed, conversations floated mid-air like static. Miranda was already there reviewing specs on a large touchscreen. She glanced up when he walked in. No smile, just a nod. They didn't need to fake ease. "Morning," she said. "Morning," Jake replied, scanning the room. "Feels like NASA with better coffee." That was the goal. She motioned for him to follow. Past the testing bays, past a row of desks where 2 junior engineers tried and failed not to stare. They stopped at a reserved section newly cleared with a set of tools already laid out on a rolling cart. In the center, mounted on a reinforced stand, was the Aurora engine. Still raw, still powerful, still theirs. Jake walked to it like he was approaching an old friend. He set his hand on the frame and closed his eyes for a second. Miranda watched, quiet. Then carefully she said, "You never thought it'd be here, did you?" Jake opened his eyes. "I never thought it'd leave my garage." He turned to her. "You sure this is what you want?" Miranda nodded. "You said she was built to help people, so let's help people." Before he could reply, Samira walked up, lab coat, open tablet in hand. Her eyes moved between them. "Didn't think I'd see you in our sandbox, Redding." Jake smirked. "Well, someone left the gate open." She handed him the tablet. "I ran some scans. We can replicate the powertrain digitally, but there's a feedback loop in the intake regulator I can't wrap my head around. It adjusts in real time like it's predicting environmental strain." Jake nodded. "That was Sarah's doing. She used to say engines should be smart enough to breathe on their own." Samira blinked. "She built that system." Jake handed the tablet back. "We built it. She made it beautiful." Samira tapped a note on her screen. "Then I'd like to know how. You game to teach me?" Jake grinned. "You got good coffee, bored to a 4,000 north on my 4." Over the next few days, the lab transformed. Not physically, but in energy. Jake didn't try to lead. He didn't preach. He just worked. Quietly. Carefully. Thoughtfully. And slowly the others adjusted to his rhythm. He showed them how to listen to the engine, not just test it, not just chart numbers, but to feel when it was right, when it was humming just enough to be alive. Miranda stopped by every afternoon just to watch. She never interrupted. She never hovered. But she listened. One night, as the lab emptied out and the sun slid down behind the skyline, she lingered longer than usual. Jake was sitting on a bench wiping grease off a housing bracket. His sleeves were rolled his shoulders a little heavier than they'd been in the morning. She sat beside him. "You okay?" she asked. Jake gave a slow nod. "Just tired." "Of the work?" He shook his head. "Of pretending like it doesn't still hurt." Miranda was quiet. Then, what was she like, Sarah? Jake's hands stopped moving. He looked over, surprised. Not because she asked, but because she meant it. He set the rag down and leaned back. She was sharp, but not sharp to cut sharp to shape. You'd throw out some rough idea and she'd pull it apart, smooth it out, rebuild it better, and somehow make you feel like it was yours the whole time. Miranda smiled softly. She sounds like someone who never fit inside a box. Jake chuckled. She hated boxes, said labels were for packages, not people. They sat in silence for a while. Miranda traced a pattern on the bench with her fingertip. My dad, he taught me how to win, she said. Taught me how to close deals, handle pressure, lead with logic. But he never taught me how to listen. Or how to lose. Jake glanced sideways. Sometimes you have to lose something big to hear what really matters. She looked at him. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not romance. Not yet. But trust. The beginning of something soft. Real. Jake stood brushing his hands on his jeans. Same time tomorrow? She nodded, then paused. Jake, he turned. You're not just building something here, she said. You're changing something, he smiled gently. Let's just make sure we finish it this time. That night, Miranda couldn't sleep. She sat on her balcony with a cup of mint tea city lights blinking below like stars that hadn't decided if they were rising or falling. She thought about Sarah, a woman she'd never met, a woman who had changed her entire trajectory without even knowing it. Miranda pulled out the photo again, the one of Jake and the Mustang on the rooftop. She stared at it for a long time. Then slowly she flipped it over and wrote. She would have been proud. She slipped it into a folder beside her laptop and exhaled. Something had shifted, and she wasn't ready for it. But maybe that was the point. Not to be ready, just to be willing. Back in the garage, Jake stood alone. Benji had gone to bed. The house was dark. The night was quiet. He opened the glove box of the Mustang, pulled out a small tin, and opened it. Inside were pieces of Sarah, figuratively, not literally. A ring, a folded schematic, a concert stub from their first date, a photo of her arms smeared with grease, grinning like the world couldn't touch her. Jake smiled, blinking back a sting in his eyes. He held the schematic up to the light. One line circled. In Sarah's handwriting, it has to sing. Jake, not just work sing. He ran his thumb over the ink. Then whispered, she's starting to. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like missing her. It felt like sharing her. A week later, Jake stood in front of a whiteboard in Langston's executive lab, dry erase marker in hand diagrams, halfway sketched across the glossy surface. Equations curved around a central concept, the real-time energy modulation system Sarah had designed. Behind him, a small group of engineers huddled close notepads, out questions scribbled in margins they didn't yet understand. This part here, Jake said, pointing to a triangular loop just beneath the intake regulator, this isn't just a stabilizer, it's a memory system. It learns how the engine performs under different conditions and adjusts for the next cycle. That's why it sounds like it's anticipating. Samira looked up from her notes. So you're saying it's self-correcting like adaptive rhythm? Exactly, Jake said. It doesn't just respond, it remembers. Sarah modeled it after human lungs. She said breathing is never the same twice, and neither should this be. A quiet awe moved through the group. One of the younger interns' eyes wide whispered, "This is 10 years ahead of anything we've got." Jake stepped back. She was 10 years ahead of us. Behind the glass, Miranda watched everything. She wasn't taking notes. She didn't need to. She'd watched that same engine spark something different in every person who came close to it. Not just curiosity, conviction. As if the machine wasn't just changing fuel into motion, but doubt into belief. Her phone buzzed in her blazer pocket. She stepped away to take the call. Miranda Langston. "Ms. Langston, it's Greg Pearson from VentureStream." She sighed. "Hi, Greg. Not the best time." "I'll keep it short," he said quickly. "We've reviewed the footage from your tech team and the rooftop demonstration. Impressive stuff." She said nothing. Greg's tone dropped to a rehearsed casualness. I've got 3 firms ready to back the Aurora system if you bring it to market under Langston. We're talking pre-market evaluation starting at $2.2 billion. Easy cap raise, full media support. Just say the word. Miranda closed her eyes. It was everything her board would want to hear, and everything Jake had been afraid of. I'll get back to you, she said, and hung up before he could reply. She turned back to the glass. Inside, Jake was laughing, really laughing for the first time since he'd stepped into that building. One of the engineers had said something, and he leaned forward, that old warmth flashing like sunlight on metal. She hadn't heard what the joke was, but the sound of his laugh tugged something loose in her chest. That night, Jake and Benji sat in the driveway, the Mustang between them, both of them quietly watching stars blink through thin clouds overhead. You think she'd be proud? Benji asked, chin tilted up, eyes sky deep. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. I hope so. Benji turned to him. Why didn't you ever tell me all this? The patents, the garage work, everything. Jake hesitated. I didn't want to give you a front row seat to disappointment, he said. When the engine didn't go anywhere, and when your mom, when she was gone, it felt like telling the story would just reopen the hurt. Benji nodded slowly. But it's still part of me, right? Jake looked at him. You're the best part of it. Benji blinked hard, lips pressing together. I miss her dad. I know, buddy. Jake reached out, pulled him close. Me too. They sat there a long time. The stars blinked above. The Mustang rested between them like a bridge between memory and motion. Then Benji lifted his head. Hey, are you and Miranda, like... Jake pulled back, slightly surprised. What? Benji smirked. You smile different when she texts. Jake laughed, not answering. But maybe he didn't need to. The next day brought complications. Jake walked into the lab to find the atmosphere changed. The team was still working, still focused, but there was a layer of tension in the room now, like someone had dimmed the lights without telling anyone. Samira pulled him aside. You know about the market valuation, right? She asked. Jake frowned. What market valuation? She looked at him carefully. Langston's board's already talking numbers. Someone leaked the footage of your demo, and now the big sharks are circling. Jake's jaw set. Miranda told me this wasn't about selling it. Samira shrugged. Maybe she's not selling it. But this is a corporation, Jake. The board has power too. He turned away, pulse quickening. He found Miranda in her office, arms crossed, looking out the window like the skyline might have answers. I need to know if this is still ours, he said. She turned already, expecting the question. It is. Then why is it being priced like a product? Because someone on my board is playing both sides, she said. They leaked the footage. I didn't. Jake stepped closer. That's not enough. If we do this, if we keep building this out, I need something more than your word. Her eyes narrowed. You don't trust me, I want to, Jake said. But I've seen what money does to good things. You said we'd build it different. Let's prove it. Miranda was quiet. Then she reached into her desk drawer, pulled out a contract. Already printed, already signed on her side. Jake took it, scanned it. It was a joint ownership agreement. 50-50 rights between Langston Innovations and Jake Redding. No buyout clause, no silent investor clause. All intellectual property protected unless Jake personally approved it. He looked up. You did this already? She nodded. Before the board even saw the engine. I knew this would happen. Jake blinked. Why didn't you tell me I needed to know you were in this for more than legacy, and now I do? He exhaled, heart slowing. He extended his hand. She took it. There was a moment as their hands held just a second too long when something unspoken passed between them. Neither one said it, but they both knew. This was more than partnership. It was beginning to feel like healing. Like home. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in front of a sea of cameras. The room was warm, the air too still, and everything around him shimmered with polished glass brushed steel, and just enough branding to remind him this wasn't his world. Miranda stood beside him, not in the center, but off to the right, quietly letting the spotlight fall on him. She wore black, crisp and clean, with her hair pulled back like always. But something had changed in her, too. She no longer looked like she was holding her breath. Langston's official press reveal for Project Aurora was underway. Behind them, the Mustang sat elevated on a rotating platform, the hood propped open, the engine framed in soft, glowing light, like a modern art piece. Clean energy innovation and legacy, those were the buzzwords wrapped into every headline lining the press packets. But Jake wasn't here for headlines. He took a breath as the moderator stepped aside and motioned for him to speak. "Good morning," Jake said, voice level but edged with that familiar quiet grit. "I'm Jake Redding. For the past 15 years I've been working nights as a janitor and days as a dad. Before that I was a mechanical systems engineer. Before that, just a guy who liked building things." A few chuckles rippled from the crowd, but Jake didn't smile. "This engine what you're seeing behind me isn't a product of corporate funding or tech incubators. It was born in a 2-car garage next to a washing machine that rattled louder than it spun, built by 2 people who believed machines should be smarter and people should be kinder." He paused. "My wife Sarah designed the base of this system. She believed energy could move differently, more efficiently, more gently. She used to say the best engines shouldn't sound like they're yelling. They should sound like they're listening." Silence, the good kind. Jake scanned the room. "This engine doesn't belong to a corporation. It belongs to all the people who never got a chance because their ideas didn't come wrapped in money. It belongs to the future." He nodded once, stepped back. Miranda joined him slowly, not to speak but to stand beside him. Together. And when the applause came, it wasn't polite. It was real. Later that night, after the reporters cleared, after the lights dimmed, after the engine was wheeled back to the lab, Jake found himself walking the halls of Langston's top floor with Miranda. Neither of them said much at first. They just walked. It felt like exhaling. "I almost didn't do this," Jake admitted, hands tucked in his jacket pockets. "Didn't want to stand up there and pretend I knew what to say." Miranda glanced at him, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "That's why it worked." Jake looked over. "You didn't sell them. You told the truth." And they listened. They reached the edge of the rooftop deck. The city stretched out below them, lights glittering in the soft haze of evening. Jake leaned on the railing. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" Miranda hesitated. "Every day for the past 6 months." He looked at her, surprised. She laughed quietly. "Running a billion-dollar company sounds impressive, but sometimes I just want to wake up and build something real, not reports, not strategies, just something that matters." Jake studied her in the fading light. "You're building something now." She nodded, but her voice caught. "Maybe. But sometimes I feel like I showed up too late." Jake shook his head. Sarah didn't leave a clock. She left a path. They stood there side by side, the breeze brushing between them like a question. And for the first time, Miranda reached for his hand. Not with a declaration. Just a quiet touch. Jake didn't pull away. They stood like that for a while, not speaking, just being. The next morning, Miranda walked into her office to find a package sitting on her desk. No label, just her name written in Jake's familiar, slightly uneven handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a photo. Sarah, Jake, and baby Benji in the garage, grease on Jake's cheek. Sarah mid-laugh, the Mustang behind them still primer gray. Underneath the photo was a note. You asked what she was like. She was this. Miranda sat down, hands trembling just a little, and traced the edges of the photo. She hadn't expected that. Not the gift. Not the softness it brought with it. In that one image, she could feel all of it: love, loss, purpose. And something else. Permission. To move forward. To feel something. To be something more than the mask she wore every day. She closed her eyes and let herself sit in it. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to be in control. Back in the garage, Jake turned a wrench, slowly fine-tuning a new mount bracket for the next phase of integration. He was humming softly Sarah's tune, the one she always hummed when deep in thought. The one he hadn't let himself hum in years. Benji burst through the door, holding a flyer. "Dad, you got invited to speak at the Regional Tech Expo. Look." Jake wiped his hands, took the flyer, and chuckled. "Guess they want the janitor inventor now. You're not just a janitor," Benji said, voice firm. "You're a builder." Jake looked at him, that proud smile returning. "You're right. And you're part of this too, you know." Benji's eyes lit up. "Can I be your assistant?" Jake grinned. "You already are." They laughed, the kind of laugh that comes easy when something that was broken starts to mend. Across town, Miranda stood on her balcony again. This time she wasn't looking down at the city like it owed her something. She was looking forward, holding the photo in one hand and dialing her father's old office line with the other. When the assistant answered, Miranda said only one thing: "I want access to the archives. It's time we start giving credit to every voice we silenced." And somewhere out there, Jake's engine waited to sing, not just for the crowd, but for the people still waiting in the quiet building, something beautiful in the dark. Langston's R&D wing had never felt this alive. It wasn't just the people, though there were plenty. Engineers, interns, consultants, all circling the Aurora engine like it was something sacred. There was energy in the air, the kind that buzzed in your chest before a storm or a breakthrough. The kind that made you forget what day it was. Jake moved through the room. Sleeves rolled smudges of graphite on his knuckles, nodding as Samira walked him through a software simulation. The Aurora interface was now displayed on a sleek glass screen, flickering in real time with adaptive torque readings. "She's doing more than holding," Samira said, tapping the corner of the screen. "She's learning. The longer we run it, the smarter it gets." Jake tilted his head, impressed but cautious. "That's the part that scares me." Samira frowned. "Why, it's working. Because Sarah once said, every machine learns from the people who teach it." "What if we teach it the wrong things?" Samira fell quiet. Miranda had just walked in when she heard that. She stood by the door for a moment, watching Jake. He was more comfortable now, more in his element, but that edge of protectiveness never left him. Not over the engine, not over Sarah's legacy. And maybe she thought that's what made him different. He wasn't building something for applause. He was building something true. She stepped into the room, cleared her throat gently. "Jake," he turned, brushing a hand through his hair. "Hey, can I steal you for a minute?" He followed her out of the lab and into her office, where a folder sat waiting on her desk. She picked it up, hesitating for a second before handing it over. Jake took it slowly. "What's this?" "I went through my father's archives," she said quietly. "I found your original proposal, Sarah's diagrams, notes in the margins. He saw it. He read it. Jake's hand gripped the folder a little tighter. He left a comment. Miranda continued, her voice nearly a whisper. It said, "Too idealistic. No viable commercial route." That was it. Jake looked down, jaw tense. He didn't even give us a call back. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." He was silent for a long time. Then he looked up. "It wasn't just about the engine," he said. "It was about how he made us feel invisible." Miranda nodded slowly. "He did that to a lot of people." Jake looked at her, something shifting in his eyes. "You're not him." That caught her off guard. "You're not him," he repeated. "You listen. You show up. You let people matter. That folder doesn't define who you are." Miranda swallowed hard, blinking. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jake nodded once, then turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped. "You ever think about what comes next?" She tilted her head. "For the engine, no. For us." The air felt different now. He hadn't said it with pressure, just curiosity, vulnerability. Miranda took a breath, walked around the desk until she stood in front of him. "I think about it all the time," she admitted. Jake's eyes searched hers, waiting. "But I also know you're still carrying a lot," she added. "And I don't want to be another weight you feel responsible for." "You wouldn't be," he said. "You'd be the thing that helps me set the others down." That landed. Soft. Real. Miranda smiled barely. "Then maybe we just take the next step. No labels, no rush, just see where it goes." Jake smiled back. "I can do that." They stood there, not touching, but closer than they'd ever been. The pause held everything. Across the city, Benji sat in the school library staring at his Chromebook, a blank document open for a science project. He tapped his pencil against his notebook, then stopped. He typed a title, "The Engine That Learned to Sing." And he smiled. Back at Langston, an emergency meeting had been called on the 12th floor. Miranda walked in to find the board already seated, grim-faced and silent. Greg Pearson, the investor who'd called her weeks ago, stood at the head of the table with a neutral expression and a stack of printed reports. "Thank you for joining," he said. "I'll get right to it." Miranda took her seat. Greg held up one of the reports. "There's been an unexpected leak. A private firm claims to have acquired early design files of a powertrain that matches the Aurora system's core structure. They're calling it Project Solus." Miranda sat forward. "That's not possible." Greg's voice didn't waver. "They're filing for provisional patents as we speak." Jake, seated next to her, went still. "They're claiming it's based on open-source modifications," Greg added. "But the timestamps and blueprints are too close to be coincidence." "Which firm?" Miranda asked, her tone sharp. Greg sighed. "Heliotech, one of our competitors. They were at the press launch." Jake muttered. "They got in through the demo footage." Miranda turned to the board. "This was never open source. The design was private, internally protected." A murmur spread through the room. "We need to file an immediate challenge," she continued. "Our design was in use years before they even existed." Greg raised his hand. "With respect, Miranda, that will take time. Months, maybe years." Meanwhile, the public narrative could shift. Jake leaned in, voice steady but low. "They're stealing Sarah's work." Everyone went quiet. Miranda looked around the room. "This isn't about PR," she said. "This is about integrity, about doing the right thing even when it's complicated." She turned to Jake. "We'll fight it. I promise." He nodded, but his jaw was set. The old weight was back on his shoulders. And Miranda felt it too. The threat wasn't just about ownership anymore. It was about truth. And as the meeting broke, and people filtered out and the lights dimmed overhead, she knew this was the beginning of the hardest part. But she also knew they weren't facing it alone. The rain hit the windows, in soft waves, almost like the city was whispering. Miranda sat alone in the boardroom. Lights dimmed a single lamp, casting a warm glow over the document spread in front of her. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. She didn't touch it. The heliotech leak had turned into something uglier than she expected. Headlines were shifting words like reverse engineering competing prototypes, claims of collaboration twisting the narrative that she and Jake had fought so hard to anchor in truth. The worst part wasn't the chaos. It was the silence from inside Langston. Her own board had gone quiet, waiting, calculating, seeing which way the wind would blow. A soft knock at the door broke the quiet. Jake stepped in his jacket, damp from the rain, hair pushed back, eyes tired but alert. "I figured you'd still be here," he said. Miranda didn't look up right away. "Did you see it?" "The article?" "Yeah." He walked closer, pulled out a chair, and sat across from her. She finally looked up. "They're painting us like we're the ones who copied them." Jake leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "We knew this would happen." "I didn't think it'd feel like this," she said, voice low. "Like we're screaming into a void while someone else writes the story." Jake looked at her. "You're not used to losing control." She smiled bitterly. "No, I'm not." Jake exhaled through his nose. Neither was Sarah. She hated it, but she always said something that stuck with me. What? He tapped the table lightly. "When people try to bury you, they forget you're a seed." Miranda closed her eyes. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd say, isn't it? Jake nodded. She was always stubborn in the right ways. There was a long pause. Then Miranda opened a folder and slid it toward him. "I've been going through your old patents, the ones that were never processed." Jake frowned. "Why, because there's a paper trail," she said. "Emails, submission timestamps, handwritten notes. I even found the original envelope you mailed to my father's office, unopened." Jake stared at the folder. "That's how close you were," she whispered. "One drawer away." He looked up, eyes heavy. "I spent years thinking it wasn't good enough, that I wasn't good enough. You were," she said. "You are." He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "So what now?" Miranda leaned back. "We make our move, carefully, legally, but we also do something heliotech won't expect." Jake raised an eyebrow. "We show people why it matters, not just the engine but the story behind it." Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "You want to go public?" "Not with data," she said. "With heart." She stood and paced slowly, the sound of rain filling the silence. "Jake, people don't fight for technology. They fight for meaning, for connection. You're not just a creator, you're living proof of what it means to hold on to a dream when the world forgets you." He stayed quiet. Miranda turned to him. "Let them leak files. Let them flash numbers. We'll give people something real." "You, Benji." Sarah's voice. The moments that built this. Jake looked up at her, then down at the folder again. "Feels risky." "It is." He gave her a wry smile. "You've changed. So have you." That hung in the air for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand on top of his. "I'm not doing this without you." Jake didn't move his hand away, and in the silence, something unspoken passed between them. Not strategy, not ambition, something human. And then quietly Jake said, "Let's tell them everything." Miranda nodded once the rain softening, as if even the sky had paused to listen. The old Mustang rolled into the Langston parking lot just after sunrise, Its engine, quiet, steady, confident, sounded nothing like the rumble it used to carry. It didn't roar anymore. It breathed. Jake parked by the loading dock and stepped out into the cold morning air, coffee in one hand, a flash drive in the other. The sky was soft with light, the city not quite awake, as if holding its breath. Inside the studio, crew was already setting up. Miranda stood at the center of it, all coordinating with lighting techs, adjusting camera angles, reviewing the storyboard she and Jake had spent hours drafting the night before. Her presence was different now, less corporate, more grounded. She looked like a woman who'd taken the mask off and decided she didn't need it anymore. Jake walked in and handed her the flash drive. The archive footage, he said. Garage videos, sketches, Sarah's audio logs. It's all on there. She took it gently, as if it weighed more than it should. Are you sure? He nodded. If we're doing this, we do it all the way. Miranda looked up at him, something quiet passing between them. They were about to open their story to the world, not the polished version, not the branded one, but the messy, aching, beautiful truth of it. The campaign would launch as a docu-series built from dust. One part story, one part defense. But most of all, a chance to bring people into the why, not just the how. The lights were warm. The backdrop was simple. One chair, one microphone, one voice at a time. The first interview would be Jake's. He stepped onto the set, sat down, and waited for the crew's signal. Miranda stood behind the camera, arms crossed, heart pounding just a little harder than it had yesterday. Rolling, the director called. A red light blinked on. Jake took a breath. My name is Jake Redding. I'm not a CEO. I'm not an executive. I'm a dad. I used to work nights at a tech campus cleaning up after people who never learned my name. Before that, I built machines with the woman I loved. He paused, voice steady. Sarah was a lot of things. Brilliant, kind, intense in the best way. She didn't just build engines. She believed they should understand people, should adapt, adjust, should learn just like we do. He smiled softly. The engine we built didn't come out of a $1 million lab. It came from our garage. Between diaper changes and late bills. It came from loss, from grief. And eventually from hope. He looked at the camera. This isn't just about what we made. It's about why we never gave up, even when no one believed it mattered. The light went off. Silence filled the room. Then Miranda stepped forward, her eyes shining. That was perfect, she whispered. Jake stood, ran a hand through his hair. Let's hope people see it for what it is. They will. And as the crew reset for the next shot, Miranda walked over to him. Hey, she said, quieter now. I know this has been overwhelming for both of us. Jake nodded, watching her. But I want you to know when I look at this whole story, I don't just see the engine, or the pitch, or the fight with Heliotech. She stepped closer. I see you. The way you protect what matters. The way you never quit. The way you love. Jake's breath caught in his throat. And I think she added, voice soft. I might be falling for that man. For a second he didn't speak. Then gently, honestly, he said, I think I already have. Their hands met. No flash, no spotlight. Just warmth. Just real. And in the quiet hum of the studio lights, surrounded by the echoes of all they'd fought to keep alive, Jake and Miranda stood together not in victory yet, but in something better. In belief. The response came faster than they expected. Within 24 hours of the first episode of Built from Dust going live, social media lit up like wildfire. Comments poured in thousands, then tens of thousands. People weren't just watching, they were connecting, remembering, grieving, hoping. It wasn't about the engine anymore. It was about them. Jake scrolled through the feed. Late that night, Benji curled up asleep on the couch beside him. He read messages from single parents, mechanics, teachers, dreamers, each one echoing a piece of his own story back to him. I'm a widow too. Watching you speak about Sarah made me feel like I wasn't alone. I never thought someone like me could invent something. Until now. That engine doesn't just sound different. It feels different. Like it's alive. Jake's throat tightened. He set the phone down gently. Outside, the sky was velvet dark city lights bleeding across the horizon. Quiet, but not empty. Miranda's name flashed on his screen. He picked up immediately. I take it you've seen the numbers? She said, voice a little breathless. I have. They're calling it one of the most human tech launches in a decade. Even Heliotech issued a response today. Said they're re-evaluating their ownership claims. Jake's eyes widened. Seriously, Miranda exhaled. We hit something they can't duplicate. Truth. There was a pause. Then, softer, she added, also, I miss you, he smiled. We saw each other 3 hours ago. I know. Her voice was warm. But it still counts. Jake leaned back into the couch, his hand resting on Benji's shoulder. I think we're finally turning a corner. You are, she said gently. And so is he. Jake looked at Benji, his hair messy, his breath slow and even. He wants to build his own model of the Aurora, Jake said. Told me today he's going to start with Lego. Miranda laughed. Every legacy starts small. He paused, then added, I told him maybe next time. You could help? She was quiet for a beat. Then I'd love that. The next morning, Miranda stood at the edge of the Langston boardroom, facing a long wall of windows, as her board filed in behind her. There were murmurs, questions, the usual tension that came with any high-stakes meeting. But Miranda wasn't nervous. She'd brought the folder, again, Jake's folder. Not because she needed proof, but because she needed a reminder. A reminder of why this mattered. I'm not here to ask for approval, she began, turning toward them. I'm here to inform you that Langston Innovations is filing formal litigation to protect the Aurora system from Heliotech's false claims. The murmurs stopped. One of the senior members adjusted his glasses. Miranda, are you sure that's the best move financially? I'm not chasing the best financial move, she said. I'm chasing the right one. Another member leaned in. What happens if we lose? We won't, she said. Calm. Because we have the evidence, the original designs, the timestamps. We also have the public behind us. And the truth. Silence. Then another question. And what about Jake Redding's stake? She didn't blink. It stays. 50-50. No dilution. The room tensed. But he's not. He is the origin, she said firmly. No one else could have built what he built. No one else had the reason to. And just like that, the conversation shifted, because the tone had shifted. She wasn't asking for consensus. She was declaring a line. Later that afternoon, Jake stood in the workshop, again tools spread across the table. Benji sat cross-legged on the floor nearby, building a tiny plastic replica of the Mustang. Dad, Benji said, do you think it's weird that something we built just for us is suddenly everywhere? Jake paused, set down the wrench. I think sometimes the things we build in quiet are the ones that speak the loudest. Benji nodded, not fully understanding, but liking the sound of it. There was a knock on the garage door. Jake walked over and opened it. Miranda stood there, no assistant, no car service, just her holding a takeout bag and smiling like she'd just found home after a long day. I brought dinner, she said. Jake stepped aside, the smile already forming. You're getting good at this. I had to impress your sous chef. Benji lit up. Is that fried chicken? The good kind, she said, handing it to him. They sat on the shop floor that night, eating with their hands surrounded by tools and dreams and half-sketched blueprints. At one point, Miranda reached for Jake's hand without even thinking. And this time he didn't just take it. He held on like it had always been meant for him. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper, old wood, and nerves. Jake sat at the edge of a long bench, shoulder-steady fingers laced together in his lap. Across the aisle, representatives from Heliotech whispered urgently to their legal team, their suits sharp, their expressions sharper. Miranda stood just a few steps ahead of him, speaking quietly with Langston's counsel. She wasn't dressed for war. She was dressed for clarity. A dark blazer, simple blouse. Nothing flashy. Nothing to hide behind. Jake looked over at her and caught her eyes for just a second. She gave him the smallest nod. This wasn't about proving Heliotech wrong anymore. It was about proving Sarah right. The judge called for quiet, and the room settled like a breath held too long. What followed was a blur of expert testimony, technical comparisons, timelines, and recorded filings, each one layering a new truth into the foundation they'd spent months rebuilding. When the court took a break for lunch, Jake stepped outside and found Miranda sitting on a bench beneath a tree that hadn't lost all its leaves yet. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, her voice low. "I keep thinking about how different things could have been if your letter had made it into my father's hands." Jake sat beside her. He wasn't ready for it. She glanced at him. "Do you think we are?" He didn't answer right away. "I think we're not here because we were ready," he said. "We're here because we kept going even when we weren't." Miranda exhaled a quiet breath. That's the kind of answer Sarah would have given. Jake smiled. She always was a few steps ahead. They sat in silence for a while, letting the wind move through the branches above. Then Miranda turned to him. "What happens if the court rules in our favor?" Jake tilted his head. "We build. And if we lose," he didn't hesitate. "We build anyway." Her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with something steadier belief. "I wish she could see this," she whispered. "She can," Jake said. Miranda looked at him. He didn't flinch. "Every time we make the right call, every time we put people first, that's her." She reached out and took his hand without looking away. It was quiet, natural. No moment had been planned, but it felt like they'd arrived exactly where they were meant to be. Back inside the courtroom, the judge returned to the bench, shuffling a few papers, eyes heavy with thought. Jake held his breath. Miranda's fingers brushed lightly against his. The judge spoke calmly, clearly. "This court finds that the original designs and foundational engineering principles behind the Aurora system were conceived, documented, and partially patented by Mr. Jacob Redding and his late wife, Dr. Sarah Redding, prior to the existence of Heliotech's development team." Jake blinked. "The court recognizes Langston Innovations and Mr. Redding as rightful and sole owners of the Aurora engine IP and orders Heliotech to cease all development marketing and external communication related to Project Solus effective immediately." A wave of murmurs passed through the room, like a current. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Miranda closed her eyes for a second, then opened them and smiled relief and fire and quiet victory all wrapped into one look. They didn't cheer. They didn't stand. They just stayed still, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't about winning a case. It was about reclaiming a voice that had been silenced. Later that night, they gathered in the garage, just Jake, Benji, Miranda, and Samira. The Mustang sat in its usual place, the hood closed now, but its story open for the world to see. Benji handed Jake a silver plaque. "What's this?" Jake asked. Benji grinned. "Read it." Jake looked down. "Aurora engine dedicated to Sarah Redding. For every spark born in silence. Jake swallowed hard. Miranda stepped closer and ran her hand along the side of the car. She built the heart. You gave it a voice. Jake nodded, eyes misted, voice soft. She never wanted fame, just a future. Then we'll make sure it's one worth living, Miranda said. They mounted the plaque together right where the front badge used to be. And as they stood there under the soft glow of garage lights, surrounded by tools and memory and love, it finally felt like something had come full circle. Not an end, but a beginning with her name etched into it. The hum of the auditorium felt electric, even before the lights dimmed. It wasn't just another tech conference, it was the summit, the one where the biggest names announced their visions of the future. The one Jake used to watch from the janitor's break room TV, never imagining he'd be standing on its stage. Benji sat front row beside Samira, clutching a Langston lanyard around his neck. He'd dressed himself that morning, collared shirt slightly askew but proud. Behind them, investors, engineers, and press buzzed with anticipation. Backstage, Jake stood behind the curtain, adjusting the collar of his navy blazer. His palms were clammy. He looked down at the tiny photo tucked into his pocket. Sarah in the garage, grease on her cheek, eyes lit with mischief. He rubbed a thumb across it. She'd be freaking out right now, Miranda said softly behind him. He turned. She looked stunning, but not in the usual corporate perfect way. She looked present, grounded, real. The woman who'd stood beside him through the storm and helped him remember his own strength. She'd also be the one telling me to stop shaking like a loose belt, Jake muttered. Miranda smiled. Well, I think you've earned a few nerves. He nodded, then exhaled. You ready? She asked. No, he said. But I'm going anyway. She leaned in, brushing her hand against his. I'll be right here. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. Please welcome to the stage, Jake Redding, co-creator of the Aurora engine and Langston Innovation's newest partner in future mobility. Jake stepped into the light. The crowd erupted, but it didn't hit him like a wave. It hit him like warmth, like acknowledgement, not for being polished, but for being true. He stood at the center of the stage, blinking against the lights, then found Benji's face in the front row. That was enough. I'm not here to impress you, Jake, began his voice steady. I'm here to tell you that innovation doesn't always come from where you expect. Sometimes it comes from grief, from failure, from love that doesn't stop when the person is gone. He paused, letting the silence hold. I used to think I was building an engine, he continued. Turns out I was building a future I could believe in, a way to honor someone who believed in it before I did. He clicked the remote, and the screen behind him came alive, not with code or charts, but with footage of Sarah in their garage laughing as she adjusted a circuit board, Benji babbling in the background. She once said the best machines are the ones that learn us, Jake said, voice softening. And now, we're building one that can. The next slides showed the latest tests' real-time adaptive performance emissions near zero torque adjustments based on driver behavior. But the numbers weren't what caught the audience. It was the heart behind them. Jake closed with a quiet sentence. Sometimes the world calls something junk when it's just waiting for the right hands to bring it to life. The room went still. Then a slow rising applause. No frenzy, just respect. When he stepped off stage, Miranda was there, eyes shining, jaw clenched like she was holding something in, that she said was unforgettable. Jake looked at her, voice low. I didn't want to just win. I wanted to mean something. You did. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by people but wrapped in their own stillness. And then Benji ran up, arms wide. Dad, they clapped so long that was insane. Jake crouched and pulled him into a hug. You proud of us? Benji grinned. I already was. Samira joined them, holding up her phone. Guys, the engine just got a $2.1 billion licensing offer from Delta V Motors. They want to partner international scale. Jake blinked. Wait. What? Miranda took the phone, scrolling quickly. It's real. And they're offering equity, not just royalties. Benji looked between them. What does that mean? Jake smiled, standing up. It means your mom just changed the world again. They laughed. Weeks later, they stood outside a new facility breaking ground just south of Charlotte. Not a skyscraper. Not a cold tech park. A workshop. Sunlit, low profile, open to students, dreamers, and builders who didn't have a name yet. A plaque sat beside the front gate. The Sarah Redding Innovation Lab, built from dust built to last. Jake stood with Miranda watching Benji help Samira plant a tree in the center courtyard. He asked if we could grow one like the tree in her backyard. Jake said quietly. Miranda looked up. So you let him pick this one? He nodded. Every part of this, it's meant to grow. She turned to him, resting her hand on his chest. What about us? Jake didn't look away. We are too. She smiled. Even after everything, especially after everything. And then he kissed her. No spotlight, no stage, just wind roots, sunlight, and the beginning of a new chapter, not written by pain, but by choice. By hope. By love that kept building, even when it had every reason to stop.